Aloha, and welcome to SUPfm, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show.
Hello and welcome back to the SUPfm podcast. And this week we've got a real treat for you because I got to chat with the legend who is Jordan Wylie. And if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we've probably mentioned him in most episodes since we switched the podcast back on in April 2020. As Jordan admits in this episode, he wasn't the most experienced paddleboarder on the water last year when he first started, but he surrounded himself with plenty of expert support and advice in his attempt to do something that hadn't been done before, to paddle the coastline of Great Britain and to set a new world record, and, in the process, raise money for the charity he talks about in the episode. And he has almost raised the money he needs, just a little bit further to go. This is an interview that I've really been looking forward to. We tried to get him on before he set off initially on his big trip, but this is even better because we had a great chat about his experiences and his reflections looking back at his massive journey. But before we get to the episode, the days are getting longer in the Northern Hemisphere, and so as we get closer to spring, we're all getting ready to spend a lot more time on the water as things warm up. And now is a great opportunity to brush up on your knowledge so that you can become self-sufficient on the water. We're offering you £10 off the face value of the SUPfm Safety Course. And not only that, but for every course sold, we'll make a £5 donation to Jordan Wylie's Frontline Children fundraising to help build that school, which he's been working so hard to raise funding for. So use the code GBPaddle10 to get your money off the course, and you'll be able to increase your safety knowledge and support Jordan in the process. To check out the link to the course, it's in the show notes, and this is a limited offer and ends on the 19th of March 2021. So here's the episode everyone, including me, have been waiting for, Mr. Jordan Wylie. So, Jordan, welcome to SUPfm.
Thank you very much for inviting me on, Simon. Really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Really delighted to have you on. We followed your exploits, particularly over 2020, so couldn't be more thrilled to have you on. I don't think that anyone hasn't heard of you, certainly in the SUP community, after the 2020 you've had. You spent over 149 days, which is incredible, paddling 2,377 kilometres in the Great British Paddle, which was an attempt to circumnavigate the British Isles, which unfortunately ended just before Christmas, not far from the northernmost tip of mainland Britain because of a Scottish lockdown. But like most of the SUP community and anyone with a pulse, we were all really inspired by the grit and the determination you showed in such an awesome achievement. I mean, it was just incredible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. It was an incredible adventure, as you say, and it was amazing to have so much support from the SUP, the paddleboarding, the sort of water community. It was amazing. I met so many fantastic people along the way, such a humble community, and I was really privileged to be a part of that.
Yeah, well, it was fantastic. And we met for a nanosecond on a beach down here on the south coast on a particularly hot day with lots of side choppers. You were working your way between Portsmouth and I think you ended up in Bournemouth or Poole, I think, on that day.
Yeah, I remember that day very well as well. I remember seeing you on the beach and paddling over to you. I was just talking about that before with my girlfriend because she was in the water swimming that day.
Yeah, it was a big beach day, lots of families down on the beach. So you'd paddled from Portsmouth. I'm not quite sure how many kilometres that is. It's quite a hefty way, though. And I took one for the team by running a mile down the beach in my flip-flops, which is a first for me in terms of distance. I'll let the listeners decide who's the greatest hero on that particular day. But it was great to meet you, and we got a bit of a selfie and then followed your exploits around the coast. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about your back catalogue, about your CV, because you've had the most incredible experiences so far in your life. You Blackpool lad, joined the army, was it 16 when you went in?
Yeah, I joined the army straight from sort of school, really. Yeah, 16. It was, as you say, grew up in Blackpool in Lancashire. Very, very proud to be a northerner, even though I'm in the south these days. But yeah, and that's I guess where my sort of spirit of adventure really started properly, was in the army, and traveling around the world to some great places and some not so great places. But really with the army was probably where I learned a lot of really important life lessons about values and about respect and courage and discipline and all those sort of those core values that I try to still use today, even having left the army 10 years ago. I think values are very important, especially for young people, to know what you stand for, know what you believe in, and try and sort of hold yourself accountable to those standards on a daily basis.
So did the army give you a real structure and I guess lots of adventure training as well, just to really spark you off?
I think so, but probably like yourself and many other listeners, I came from a generation that was just probably before the social media and this sort of digitization that we see now. So for me, my youth was sort of climbing trees, it was camping out, it was jumping in lakes, fishing, and those sort of things that we don't see as much as I'd like to see with the sort of generation of today. We're on screens all the time now, it seems, and I really try my best to promote that, getting in the great outdoors and having adventures. But I was probably, from the area that I came from, I got myself into mischief now and again with the law and the police. As a youngster, I was easily led astray, we could say, and it was going in the army that really sorted me out, because with respect to a lot of the people I grew up with, friends and things, they ended up in drugs, crime, prison, and that would have been a very easy route for me to go down, I think, if I'd not had escaped out of the sort of bubble I was in at the time. And going in the army, that you don't survive very long if you don't sort of switch on and have a positive attitude and a sort of get things done sort of mentality. And yeah, the army really helped me grow from a sort of a cocky teenager, if I'm honest, into the man I am today, I think, in many respects. And I think all your experiences in life, whatever you do, wherever you go, they bring you to where you are today. And I'm very grateful to the army and still have a lot of connection to the military in terms of the charitable sector, and I'm a trustee and patron of military museums and bits and pieces. So, very proud to be a soldier. I served in a regiment called the King's Royal Hussars for a decade. I was a junior non-commissioned officer. I served in Northern Ireland and multiple tours of Iraq, and saw some not so nice things as well. Lost some great friends, heroes. In fact, it was challenging, but it was what brought me to where I am today. Certainly.
You're also an ambassador for the Army Cadets, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that's, if I'm very honest, I'm very proud to work with lots of brands, charities, organisations. But for me, probably my greatest honour right now today is to be, the UK a national ambassador for the Army Cadets. I think it's such an incredibly important organisation in modern society. It's one of our nation's best kept secret, and it does so much good in the world. And it's not just the cadets that attend these things, but the volunteers, it's the adult volunteers that dedicate their lives to helping grow and develop and sort of nurture young people. I think it's really important, because I go back to values again. We try and sort of hone those core values of courage, selfless commitment, respect, integrity, loyalty, discipline. We try to embed them in young people from an early age, because I think if you can understand those and sort of live by them, they can really put you on the straight and narrow for the greater good in life.
A lot of people find it very difficult coming out of the military, out of that sort of structured environment, and into Civvy Street. So you've clearly managed that really well, and your experiences since then are quite jaw-dropping, and you've written about them in a couple of books. There's experience of, I think it's called Running for My Life, where you ran a marathon in Afghanistan, Iraq and Somalia. And also Rowing Dangerously was when you crossed solo and unsupported over what's the most dangerous strait of water on the planet. How did you get to that?
Yeah, it was, it's been an amazing journey and adventure. And I think, to be honest, it was, for me as a soldier, working in conflict zones in places like Iraq, it was, we saw a lot of bad things. We saw death, we saw destruction, and we saw people's lives torn apart. And we lost some amazing friends, colleagues, heroes, as I say. But one thing that I always found very difficult to process was the sort of plight of the children in a conflict zone. There's something that, when you see things happening to children, and you see children, sort of homeless, lost their families on the streets, and sometimes missing limbs, being killed, it's absolutely brutal. And that for me is something that's never left me. And I always said that if I could ever go back to these places as a civilian and try and do some good and help, that I would do. And I've dedicated certainly the last 5 years plus to trying to have a positive impact on children's lives in war and conflict zones. So, the adventures that you refer to, they're great and they're great fun and they're great challenges. But for me, it's not about what I'm doing, like the paddle. It's about why I'm doing it. For me, it's very difficult to fundraise, where you want to raise substantial amounts of money. And when you get into the hundreds of thousands, the millions, you have to do things that are very challenging. They are different, often a world record or world first level. You have to push the boundaries beyond endurance and really try to go into new territories, unknown territory quite often from a sort of adventure perspective, because ultimately you're trying to capture the imagination of the public. You're trying to get them to buy into whatever your expedition is. So you raise as much money as possible. And with the greatest of respect to everybody, a lot of people these days have climbed mountains, they've ran marathons, they've jumped out of planes. So they're almost ordinary things to do now. So you have to think outside the box and get creative and innovative and come up with these crazy adventures that really capture the media as well. Because when you get the media on board, you get the sponsors on board. When you get the sponsors, you get the public. And it's a cycle, really. And it's something that I've spent a lot of time sort of trying to master over the last 3 or 4 years. And I had a touch wood, I had a little bit of success at it because I've sort of come up with these ideas, these adventures, give them a bit of identity, created a brand, and then sort of sold it to the public and the sponsors, and tried to provide as much value as possible. And if you keep providing value and excitement and interest, then people will keep coming back. And we've been very fortunate. But of course, I'm just the person who's sort of flying the flag at, in the media or on the TV or the social media. There's an incredible team that I try to surround myself with. One thing you learn in life is you don't do anything great alone, and that I try to find. I wouldn't even say the best people in the world. I just find the people who share the same values, the same vision, and are committed and loyal. And I've been very lucky to work with some incredible people, like on the Great British Paddle, from cameramen to filmmakers to psychologists, project managers, social media people, PR people. And you find these people, you surround yourself with them, and you don't let go. And together you build a team, and you can do some incredible things in the world. And and I'm very blessed to have met lots of very inspiring and great friends through the spirit of adventure. And there's a lot of crazy people out there, and they're not always alongside you. They can support you in different ways. And I think that was the great thing about the SUP community as well. It was a real humble community for me, and I entered it as a brand new sort of paddleboarder, and I was very welcomed. I was taught. I was very fortunate to have lots of incredible sponsors who are world leaders in their field of whatever kit they supply. So I never take anything for granted. I'm very, very blessed and fortunate, and I want to say a big thank you every time I get the opportunity to those.
Yeah, well, just to go back on some of your points, and maybe I can ask you to say a couple of things about Frontline Children, because that was the charity that you were raising money for during your paddle. But in terms of the team, absolutely, you had a support boat, and obviously the social media and all the support back in Andover and so on. Some of those characters who you went with ended up having their own sort of media profile. I mean, is it Captain Alex, is it?
Yeah, Captain Alex was the project manager, and did a great job. And people like James and Alfie, I thought were incredible at capturing for me, the filmmaker, the photographers. What was amazing about them particularly was that they were able to take the public on the journey with some magnificent sort of cinematic filmmaking, extreme environment photography. For me, I genuinely couldn't do what they did. For especially, James at the start, cameraman was probably number 5 in his role. He was logistics, he was food, he was accommodation, he was sorting so many things out. And then Alfie on the boat, he would be filming all day, and then he would have to sit on a boat when everyone's being sick and what have you, and he'd have to start editing all his footage. So it's just an incredible team of people, amazing, really.
The images are quite astounding. Well, the ones that stand out to me were when you were crossing the Irish Sea. That sounds like an absolutely monster trip. So just in terms of Frontline Children, tell us a little bit about why that charity specifically.
For Frontline Children, so I'd spent quite a long time fundraising for the last, as I say, 4 or 5 years or so. And, it's a very competitive sector. And for me, it was about accountability. So I'd raised hundreds of thousands for various charities over the years, and I always wanted to be able to tell my donors and my sponsors where exactly the money was going. And when you work with super huge charities, it's very difficult to find exactly what project they're supporting in what country or whatever it might be. So I sat down with some fellow trustees about 3 years ago, and I said, I would love to support a charity that helps children, but we get to sort of go and see these children and see the impact that we have with this fundraising. So 3 of us sat down and we came up with the idea to set up a charity. So I'm one of the trustees of Frontline Children, and we made a decision that no one would get paid. There would be no salaried staff or expenses for the people involved in the charity. So it's just a charity of complete volunteers, and the money only goes directly to support children, whether it's building a school, providing educational resources. So for me, it was really important that we knew exactly where every penny was going. And there was a tangible output. And having visited Djibouti with the Rowing Dangerously project on the Horn of Africa, I was just astonished by how many children are on the Horn of Africa who have been displaced by war and conflict. I'm talking, thousands, tens of thousands of innocent young children of all ages that have lost their families, their homes, their parents, that are. It's almost like they fell off the face of the earth. They're just the forgotten children of the world. And I really wanted to do something. And one thing that I learned in my life is that education is very powerful, and it's one of the few things that can inspire hope and for a better future for people who, on the face of it, don't really have that much to live for, as it would seem. So for me, I made a promise to the children in a little village called Asala in Djibouti that I would build a school using my fundraising over the next 2 years, which was obviously 2 years ago. And at the time, I probably didn't realize the magnitude of what I was trying to achieve. And I probably, if I'm honest, bit off a bit more than I can chew, because it's been extremely stressful. It's been very hard work. But we're nearly there. We're in touching distance now. The school will get opened in the next 3 or 4 months, in the next quarter, certainly. So it's amazing to think that, as I say, coming from Blackpool on a pretty rough council estate, to then being able to go and deliver a full school to 250 kids that would never have had that opportunity is probably one of the proudest things that I will ever do when we open that school. But it's been very stressful, that's for sure. But one of the other things is it's only been possible because of the incredible British public and the kindness of people who've believed in the adventures and in the school and the dream of trying to inspire hope through education.
So let's focus in on the journey. And one of the questions that I tend to ask people on here is to share their first experience of paddleboarding. When did you first step onto a paddleboard, Jordan?
I was probably, maybe 3 months before we started. I my local river down in Basingstoke, the sort of canal, Basingstoke Canal. I'd been on there a few times with my daughter and thought, this is quite therapeutic, paddling down the river on a nice sort of sunny day. With my daughter sat on the back of the paddleboard, and that was really my first introduction to paddleboarding. I'd never tried it before. I didn't know much about it, but I sort of had that little experience. And what I found, I'm sure we'll talk about, was the sort of blue therapy, the blue mind, how sort of tranquil and how peaceful, and just being in the outdoors is great for your mental health, and that's what really attracted me to it, I think.
3 months before you set out on your trip, that's not a lot of experience. And I know the Basingstoke Canal, there are not too many waves going on there to test your balance, are there?
No, not at all. And I probably, before I set off on the expedition, I'd probably been on a river about 5 times maximum. But I was very fortunate to spend a week with WSA in South Wales, the Water Skills Academy. I did 7 days training on the ocean with them, and that was a real culture shock for me. Getting out there on the waves, I think I spent most of the time in the water that I was doing that training with Johnny Cavell and Ben and the team down there.
Excellent. So you had 5 intense days. So your first day was pretty much in the water. I mean, it is a very different game, isn't it? Paddling on the ocean versus Basingstoke Canal.
Oh, incredible! The contrast it's uncomparable. It's a world apart from it. I can't even put into words how different it is. It's incredible, really. Paddling on the ocean without any experience is so difficult and very frustrating as well, because you just want to get on with it and get going. But, I didn't have the experience, the knowledge, and I guess doing the training gave me the foundations. It gave me the basics. But I think it was quite entertaining as well. I'm sure that WSA at the time thought, what the hell's this guy trying to do?
Yeah, but you do end up feeling it, don't you? You do end up connecting with the water. And talking about Blue Mind, it's all about that connection with the water, visually hearing it, but also feeling it. How long through the trip before you kind of got that sense where you could sort of anticipate the water's movement a lot better?
I think it was probably about a week, about 7 days of paddling, every day, 12, 15 hours. I think it was about a week in where I started. Do you know the best thing I found you can do is actually relax. And when you're a new paddler, you're so tense, you're just trying to hang on for your life. You're just trying to stay on the board, and you're not really enjoying it. You're not, and the best advice that I was probably given was so simple. It was keep your head up and relax, and just very simple advice. But that's a game changer. The moment you can relax your body, your muscles, and you're not tensed up and stressed, and keeping your head up because you have this sort of, because you're trying to stay on the board, you've got your head down looking forward. Yeah. And it's I guess it's the mistakes that all the sort of beginners make. It's classic stuff, really. But just, as I say, a week into it, I started to get into a rhythm and started to feel it. And I guess it depends on the time of year as well, because my first sort of 3 days I was crossing the Thames estuary and it was so rough, so choppy. And I was kneeling for the first 3 days. And I can remember thinking that my knees aren't going to be able to stand this much longer. It was so painful. It was excruciating to be kneeling for 12 hours. Because the problem is that if you've been kneeling for, anyone who's knelt on a paddleboard for 15, 20 minutes and then you try and stand up, it's quite difficult anyway. But, try doing that for 10 hours and then stand up. It's impossible.
Oh my God, yeah, you end up with no blood in your calves, don't you?
No, and it's dangerous as well, from sort of things like deep vein thrombosis and all these crazy things. It can become quite dangerous when you're not letting the blood circulate.
And in terms of relaxing, it tends to be the feet because you're subconsciously trying to grip the board, particularly beginners. It's
no, definitely. I felt a lot of cramps in the feet in those first few weeks, definitely.
So you were heading sort of out and around the coast and around the coast of Kent and so on, and it wasn't an easy experience. British summertime and all of that sort of stuff, quite a lot of chop. But you also had a bit of an unfortunate experience with a motorised sea-going vehicle, didn't you? Which came back and bit you a bit later on.
Yeah, it was. One of the challenges. I think it was a Little Hampton or somewhere at the time. I think it was, if I remember rightly. It was a summer day, so you get everybody coming down to the beach, but unfortunately, it brings out the wrong guns as well sometimes. There was a couple of drunken jet skiers on this particular occasion. And I'd been warned about them by the lifeguards. People were coming out and paddling with me, and they said, sort of just watch as you get further ahead. There's a few sort of young lads who are having a mess around with the music blasting. They've got bottles of beer in the hand, and they're bombing around on jet skis quite dangerously. And I was warned about them, and then they came to sort of, one of them came close to me and tried to sort of skid his jet ski to create some sort of chop and waves to throw me off. And I told him to slow down, and that was, me sort of engaging with him was his ticket to try and knock me off. And he was successful, and he came very close to my board, and I ended up, going in the water and hitting a groin in the sea, which was full of barnacles, which sort of ripped through my lower sort of shin. And silly for me, I don't know why, but again, you'd think with my experience from the military and in adventure that I would have known better, but I some reason, I always thought that seawater, salt water, was great for sort of cleaning out the wound, and it is in many respects, but not a filthy ocean that's been polluted, and it got infected quite quickly. And I paid the price for that for the coming sort of weeks, the next month or so, in and out of hospital a few times with cellulitis that just I couldn't shake off, unfortunately. But you live and learn, and you take the lessons on board. But it was pretty challenging, that, and quite disruptive to the expedition at that point.
That's right, because the weather wasn't straightforward there either. I think you made it pretty much into sort of Dorset and Devon, and then you got laid up somewhere. I think there was a storm coming in, but it must have been spectacular. I mean, what were your highlights of the south coast of England?
Oh, it was amazing, the south coast. As you say, we got stuck in, if I remember correctly, in Seaton, Devon area, for about 8 days. But actually, getting stuck there became a bit of a blessing in disguise. And one of the things that I really learned from working with Paula Reed, the adventure psychologist, was how you can reframe negative thoughts into neutral or positive ones. And one of the things that I took from that getting stuck for 8 days, which was, I think it was Storm Francis we had in the August, I was stuck there, very frustrated. The clock's still ticking, and I've lost a week of my adventure already. And I remember thinking I'm really angry and sort of annoyed. But actually, it was that week, I think, that actually I got my leg to recover, because it stayed dry for a week, and that was the problem. It was just getting wet, and the salt was getting in it. So it became a positive that we got stuck in the end, because it allowed me to shake off the sort of injury. But so many highlights on the south coast. I think, paddling, certainly Devon and Cornwall's absolutely beautiful. And some of the challenges as well of the headlands on the south coast, places like Dungeness Point, Selsey Bill, Portland Bill, the Lizard, Land's End. Some of those headlands, if you time them wrong, they're pretty nasty places, and very unforgiving too. That you have to do your risk assessments on any time you go out on the board, really. But going around headlands that are notorious can be really dangerous. But what I liked about the south coast was that I was able to hone my skills on the board in the summer. The weather only got worse from the moment I set off. So the calmest it ever was on the south coast of England. And I think that if I'd have started anywhere else in the UK, I probably wouldn't have survived for as long as I did, because I didn't have the experience or the technical ability on the board. But going down the south coast and doing those long days of 12, 14, 16 hours, it allowed me to really hone my skills as a paddler. Not that I'm a super great paddler by any means still, but it allowed me to really find my feet in the expedition. And also, because it was the summer, I think for me, the highlight always of any adventure is meeting new people. And so many lovely people came out to paddle with me, whether it was kayaks, canoes, or swimmers. So many people came out, like yourself on the south coast, and just to say hello and wish me well. And I really missed that as well. And I think the south coast as well, because we never had a support boat there, it was just myself and James. It was a real highlight of the adventure to be almost waking up in different people's gardens, B&Bs, spare bedrooms, in tents every night. And that was something I really, as much as the support boat was great for certain things, one thing I really missed was the engagement with the public on a sort of interaction level.
Yeah, and that was forced on you later on because of the situation that we find ourselves in. But even paddling the south coast, I mean, you're right, it gave you a decent experience in what was largely decent weather. But the way that the UK works, you've got the southwesterlies coming in. So basically, on any given day, you've got the wind in your face. You've got the tides heading round Land's End as well. Tell us about that little stretch, just going round Land's End, because that's another really treacherous area to get through.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. As soon as you get past the Lizard, the Britain's sort of most southerly tip or point, you really start to feel the Atlantic Ocean. It's sort of, you get round the Lizard and all of a sudden it's like, welcome to the Atlantic. And you start to see a real change in the pace of currents and waves and things, I found in my experience. And from the Lizard to Land's End, again, not too far, but there's so many sort of undercurrents in that area, and it's almost like being in a bit of a washing machine when you're going around there. And I, to be honest, at that point, I remember just hanging onto the board for my life as I was going around Land's End. A lot of people had warned me, and I'd spoke to a couple of very experienced paddlers, sort of Team GB, like Ginny Betts and Marie Buchanan, and they'd said, you have to time it right because it's so dangerous, and they told me about some sort of negative experiences that they had in the past and shared some insights. So, again, it was always great to speak to paddlers, to local fishermen, to the RNLI. Safety was always our number one priority. It was something that we tried to promote throughout with the kit equipment, with our engagement with Coast Guard Rescue, RNLI, everybody. We always did a risk assessment with Captain Alex, and if we thought it was too dangerous, we simply didn't go. But there were times that as you will know better than me, and so will the listeners, you can look at the weather forecast all day long and study it, but it can often be a different situation when you're out on the water than what the weatherman said. And that can be frustrating at times, but also it can work to your advantage, because there were days when we would say the weatherman says we can't paddle, and you'd get out and it'd be like a mill pond. It'd be flat as anything. So you've got to be flexible. You've got to sort of be ready to move at any moment in time. But going around Land's End was amazing, because one of our support team, a gentleman called Stu, who was sort of a runner on the south coast, he'd managed to go up sort of on top of Land's End where all the tourists were. And he'd gathered a big crowd round to watch me go round, so I could hear them all cheering on the radio and things, which was it was a good sort of, because it was such a prominent milestone, to paddle the whole of the south coast of England was really nice actually. And the sponsors, the girls from Angel Call Handling, they were there, and they cooked us up a Sunday roast that night, which was amazing. So really great memories.
So sort of then rounds the end of Cornwall and then back, and then the route took you up the east coast of Ireland, which obviously required a crossing of the Irish Sea. How was that? Because from this point in, there's no unforgiving bits of water, but that one particularly has got a bit of a bad rap.
Yeah, it was. If you look at probably the toughest phase for me, it was probably that in one hit, that first crossing of the Irish Sea was physically, mentally, emotionally, completely exhausting. We had a bit of a breakdown in communication with sort of the support team on land and the support team on the boat, and some decisions got made that perhaps weren't the right decisions about when we should go and when we shouldn't. And there was a slight breakdown, which we took lots of lessons from to improve our communication. But we paid for a bit of communication lapse, and it took me 5 days nearly to get across there, and it was absolutely brutal, which is incredible, because the irony of it was that when 2 months later or 6 weeks later, whenever it was, when we got to cross the Irish Sea again from sort of Bangor, Belfast to the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland, it was the longest paddle that I did in the whole expedition in one day. It was a 77-kilometer paddle, and it wasn't necessarily the toughest either, because it was like paddling a different ocean, even though in theory you'd think further north, closer to the winter, it might be worse. But it just goes to show that you never know what you're going to get sometimes. And it was a real contrast from the toughest paddle, which took 5 days, to my longest paddle, which took 77 kilometers. But they were almost opposites.
That's incredible, and it just shows how local conditions and local weathers are so specific. And having those conversations with the RNLI and fishermen and so on, they know their areas far better than anyone. But I bet your weather prediction and conditions predicting skills improved. I mean, obviously you're relying on Captain Alex, and I guess you relied on your skippers throughout, because they've probably had years on the water. But I'm sure you learnt a thing or two about predictions, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You when you're out at sea, you sort of, when you're on land, you're checking social media and Facebook and Instagram. But when you're paddling every day, you're looking at Windy and the Met Office and all these other types of apps, and Navionics and route planning and all these sort of things. And I lost track of days quite often. I didn't know what day it was. For me, it was either a windy day or a not a windy day, or a paddle day or not a paddle day. I didn't really know what day it was many times. And it was, Max Rivers as well. Max, who was our skipper on the support boat for a long period, he'd ran a paddling school out in Greece, so he was an experienced paddler. So he became a good asset actually, because he was on the water with me, so we could make a good judgment together. Whereas obviously Captain Alex was weather routing remotely. So Max became a really valuable asset on the boat and a great friend as well. But it was one of the things as well, though. You learn to sort of, well, you're living by that. If you don't paddle, you're not making progress. So as you would have seen from the amazing pictures that Alfie took at sea on the support boat, we were out in conditions that you would never go out and paddle in really in normal circumstances if you were just going out for a few hours for the day. But we needed to make progress, and obviously I had the support net of the support boat, if you like, if anything went wrong. So my risk tolerance increased as the support boat was there. Whereas when I was on my own at sea for the first sort of 6 weeks, obviously I wouldn't take probably as many risks, if you like.
Well, that's the right thing to do, obviously. And as you said, safety is the thing. So just in terms of safety, what sort of kit did you bring with you on the board? Presumably you had a VHF radio to chat to boats and so on. What other kit did you bring with you?
Yeah, so obviously on the board itself, with me, I had obviously all the usuals, what you'd expect. Hopefully, like I had my PFD from NRS. I had my leash. I used a waist belt leash, quick release. I found that a lot more efficient and a lot safer, in my personal opinion. I had my VHF radio, which was always on channel 16, and often I would speak to vessels, fishermen, ships. And people respect that as well. When you're out there and you can communicate with the RNLI, or certainly when you're going across estuaries or into harbours or ports, certainly there was times like I remember at Dover, a very busy shipping lane with cargo ships and car carriers and ferries coming in every 10, 15 minutes. I had to speak to the port control and then ask for their permission to cross the shipping lane. And I had to wait for 40 minutes for permission because it was too dangerous. So really, really important. As I had an Iridium tracker, I had a Garmin sort of backup tracker. I had the paddle logger app on my iPhone. I had mini flares. I had a personal locator beacon. So I was carrying a lot of safety equipment. Unfortunately, I never had to use much of it. But you don't want to be in a position where you haven't got it if you need it, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're talking about the board and the setup and so on, what did you do for food during the day? Couldn't have been Mars bars the whole way around.
So when I was on my own without the support boat, I would pack my. I had a deck bag from Red Paddle, and I would pack my bag with, like James would send me on my way with my packed lunch, if you like, and we would, I had dehydrated meals, I had protein shakes, I had bars, lots of nutritional supplements. It was just snacking and keep refueling energy, plenty of water. And then obviously as we got onto the support boat, I was very fortunate because I had great crew members who could, chuck me a bowl of pasta or porridge or whatever it was, some slow release sort of carbohydrates and things.
So you mentioned about the support boat. So obviously the model kind of changed as you went through. So it was less about shore-based refreshment and sleep and so on. I think you had a change of support boats, didn't you, about midway?
Well, we had a support boat from the start, but unfortunately it broke down after 3 days. We had an engine failure, but so then I paddled for the next 60 days alone, and then when we got to North Devon, crossing the Bristol Channel via Lundy Island, that's when we got the support boat, which was kindly supplied by my friends at the Royal Logistics Corps in the British Army, and that took us all the way up towards Thurso, John O'Groats area then.
So you were sleeping on board, were you, overnight on that?
Literally, yeah, we slept on board overnight, and I loved the paddleboarding, but I didn't enjoy the sleeping on the boat. It was because of the COVID. There were lots of harbours and marinas we couldn't go in, so quite a lot of time we spent at anchor. So there was a lot of rocking about throughout, especially as we got into Scotland, and there was obviously no heater on board this yacht either. So it was pretty cold sometimes.
You must have had terrible sea legs when you finally got on shore.
Yeah, it was a bit wobbly, that's for sure. But the same for everybody though. Because of the COVID, we couldn't really do much ashore, so it was just part and parcel. And we were never complaining about the COVID issues because we also appreciated that we were one of the few people in the world that was still out having some fun and having an adventure. So there was no negativity surrounding the COVID issue. We respected that it was, we had to play by the rules, and we were lucky to be still going.
So you continued your journey. You'd gone across the east coast of Ireland, and made your crossing across to Scotland, so Tobermory and so on. That coast is absolutely spectacular, isn't it? But this is when the weather was, I guess, very unforgiving in the middle of the summer on that West Coast. I think they talk about having 4 seasons in one day, but there's some spectacular sights, particularly around Skye. So you paddled under the Skye Bridge, didn't you?
Yeah, as you say, absolutely majestic scenery, the wildlife, nature, the landscape is just amazing. I think I described it as being beautifully brutal. It is, as you say, unforgiving as well. So for me, probably my favourite part, because it's just so spectacular. Just every day paddling, it's like paddling through a postcard or something. It's just amazing. But the sea and the conditions are absolutely unforgiving, relentless. But we paddled under the Skye Bridge, the only bridge that we came across, and that we paddled under. Sorry, and then up, as you say, up the Tobermory Channel, and then just beautiful. I recommend anyone who's an adventure paddler, you've got to go in your lifetime and go up there. And the Summer Isles as well, absolutely beautiful. And then all the way up that coast, up towards Cape Wrath, although it's brutal, and I'm sure at the right time of year, though, I'm sure it's beautiful as well. There's an incredible beach actually just before Cape Wrath, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but it's one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and it's so beautiful because nobody can really get to it. I think it's like 6 miles to the nearest road or something, but it's literally just a couple of kilometres short of Cape Wrath, this beautiful white beach, really unbelievable.
So how was your physical condition at that point? Because I noticed you sort of getting skinnier and skinnier as you went on, obviously not surprisingly, bearing in mind the amount of effort that you're putting on there. That must have been difficult in terms of managing the cold as well.
Yeah, do you know, it's a strange one because as we got further north and as the expedition paddled, the battle didn't really become physical. Of course, the challenge with the waves and things was brutal, but the windows became less and less to paddle, so if we take the first 4 weeks of paddling, we were paddling 16, 17 hours a day on the south coast, and that became, I remember I was getting like claw hand where I couldn't bend my fingers and open them because I'd been paddling for 17 hours holding the paddle and things, whereas when we got into Scotland and places, you might only be able to paddle for 2 hours and then you might be off for 3 days waiting for another window. So it was, for me, it was a paddle of two halves in many respects. The first half was physical, but the second half, which was for me much tougher, was the psychological battle of just never knowing when you're going to be able to move again and not knowing what you was going to get from one day to the next with the weather. And for me, the mental battle is what it became in the end, and that was much harder than the physical.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the worst things about a psychological battle like that is the uncertainty. Did the psychologist help you manage that? You mentioned about reframing earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important. Lots of tools in my sort of mental toolbox, if you like, that Paula was giving me every day. And, sport, people often talk about sports psychology, but adventure psychology is very different because in a sports environment, the conditions are fixed. It's normally quite safe. It's normally for a set period of time, which is quite short. If you think of a football match or a sprint or whatever it might be, whereas an adventure psychology is very different because it's enduring. That it's not a safe environment. You don't know when the end is. The conditions are changing all the time from one day to the next, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and that becomes very difficult to manage. But also, as much as it becomes difficult to manage, it also creates a really high level of resilience. After you've completed it, so. Lots of challenges, but the ability to reframe and look at things differently became really important as we got further north in Scotland. And instead of worrying about the weather, I started to focus on letting my body recover or doing some. We were doing by Scotland, on the north coast of Scotland. I think we probably paddled 3 times in 14, 15, 16 days. We were doing kids' assemblies via Zoom and all sorts at the end.
Wow, that's incredible. And just talk a little bit about Blue Mind, because you came across quite a lot of wildlife, lots of contact with nature and so on. And I know you've been very open about mental health, and that you've really felt that exposure to the water really helped you. I guess seeing lots of dolphins and seals cheers people up regardless. But just talk a little bit about Blue Mind and how that affected you as you paddled round.
Yeah, as you say, I speak quite openly about mental health. I think it's really important to do that, especially in this day and age. And I've, like a lot of people out there, I've had my own challenges with I was diagnosed with severe depression and chronic anxiety about 5 years ago now. And like everybody, you find life challenging sometimes. The world gets a bit too much, and I'd been on medication and have been on medication for all the way up to the paddle for about 4 years on sertraline, 200 milligrams of sertraline, and I'd come down over the year before the paddle to about 100 grams, and then when I was on the support boat, the first support boat, I actually left all my medication on it. So 3 days into the paddle, I'd left my medication on the support boat and didn't have any more on me, and I felt quite all right. So I went for a week or so, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to keep paddling because I'm at sea. I'm as you say, I'm experiencing the blue therapy, the blue mind. I'm out engaging with nature, and I decided to stop my medication, which I learned actually was quite dangerous. But at the time, it felt right. And for the time that I paddled for the whole 149 days, I have never felt better with my mental health, if I'm completely honest. And I think, as you say, when if you're paddling with dolphins every day, if that doesn't make you happy and smile, there's something wrong. And that the engagement with nature and the great outdoors was ultimately probably one of the best highlights of it all. And I think that not just for me, but for the crew, for the support crew on board the boat, just being outside every day, as much as it's cold, as much as it's not that nice, it was brilliant for your mental health and for building resilience. But when I came back from the expedition, obviously being cut short just before Christmas Eve, and then sort of going into a level 4 lockdown and living alone and all that sort of stuff, I went to to be very honest, I haven't spoken much about it since, but I went to an incredibly low place. I found life very, very difficult, and since I've ended up in therapy and I'm back on medication, to be completely transparent and honest. And so if the blue mind, the blue therapy stuff is absolutely fact of life. It works. It definitely works. But I think for me, I probably didn't go around it the right way by just completely coming off my medication and going straight in there. I should have done it a bit more in a controlled, and perhaps I was a bit silly and naive in that respect. But it's a weird time at the moment, as well as, with all this COVID and lockdown, and the whole world is in a very crazy, unique place, and everyone's struggling with mental health. And one of the things I've been doing is, I've never really enjoyed walking. I've always been a runner or something. It's got to always be quite adrenaline based. But at the moment, for the last month, I've just been going on walks for 60 minutes a day and actually really enjoying just slowing down and processing what's going on in my life. And I think it's something, we should all try and do, because, we're all at 100 mile an hour in this day and age. And I think now is a good time just to get outside and slow down. And, whether it's taking the dog for a walk or walking with your family or your partner, it's really important to be in the moment as well, especially in this social media sort of world we live in now. We're all sort of constantly scrolling through pages or looking at screens, but it's important just to switch off and be mindful. I've started. I do a lot, not a lot, but I do daily meditation now as well. Every morning when I wake up, I use the Headspace app, and that's something that's helped me a lot. So yeah, it's really important. You've got to look after your mental health. It's so important. It really, really is, and I can't stress that enough, because. And also look out for people as well. I've been very lucky to have people reach out to me and look out for me, and I try and do the same for those who might be struggling. It's important that you check in with family and friends and try and have a sense of gratitude as well in these tough times. Again, going back to that reframing, although we can't go out and we can't travel or whatever at the moment, we still can, we can look out for each other. We can. If we've got 3 meals a day, if we've got roof over our head, if we're seeing our family, we're still very fortunate in the world. So it's important to have a sense of gratitude, I think.
Absolutely. And it's setting up those habits and making sure that you just reinforce them and realise, in comparison to those children in Djibouti, we're basically really quite lucky in comparison. One of the interesting things you mentioned about social media, there is that curated life, and it's really important to not assume that the sorts of lives that people are representing on social media is actually close to how they are. Everyone's got their own stuff which they're managing, and everyone's got their own doubts. So I think what you've done, which is talk so transparently about mental health, means that no one's a Superman. Everyone has those dips, and it's really important to talk about it and share it, and also to realise that people do have things going on underneath the surface which they don't necessarily talk about.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that social media, as much as it does some great things, especially where sort of fundraising and awareness for important issues is concerned, it also there's a dark side to that as well. And as you highlight there, it's not always the case of how people's lives look. I often think it's like a show reel of all your best bits. It's not the reality, and it's quite dangerous because especially for the next generation and young people, because we live in a world now where I see young people every day, and the amount of filters that have to go on a photograph these days. People are sort of almost ashamed to post a picture of themselves that hasn't been filtered 5 times before it gets on there, and the negativity sometimes, the trolling, the bullying. There's a lot of downsides to social media, and it can get to people. It can get to anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. And we've seen that, there's been lots of mental health challenges and tragedies as well in, high profile people because of things that have happened online. So just be kind to one another. Think about the things that you say and the things that you post. Just think, would you say that to that person if they were sat next to you, in the cafe or whatever? Because a lot of the things that people say, they would never dream of saying to someone's face. And I think it's just about being kind and mindful about what you post, because people have feelings, and the human, and when people aren't feeling good, bad things can happen sometimes. So there's also a lot of it's a bit of a gripe of mine that there's a lot of very famous, uninspiring people out there, and we live in this celebrity culture world now where your credibility is almost based on how many followers people you have and things like this, and it's very sad and very shallow. And you get these people who go on these sort of reality shows and they're catapulted to fame overnight, and then they've got millions of followers, and they're pushing out messages and posting pictures of and people are following them. The next generation are influenced by them. Some of these reality stars have more influence than mainstream politicians and leaders and business leaders, which is quite scary. And I just think that there should be accountability. If you're going to have a public profile, you need to be doing good with that. It should be the right messages, the right sort of points, and you should be a role model. I personally, I'm not saying I'm a saint by any means, but I like to think that I try and use social media for a force of good to try and hopefully educate, inspire, or motivate, or do some good. And whether it's fundraising or whatever, I try to extract negativity out of my life very quickly, and avoid debating with people and things, because it's you're often banging your head against a brick wall trying to debate with people on social media.
Another great campaigner for mental health is Charlie Head, and I know you met him. I think you were passing in opposite directions as you were heading up over the north coast of Scotland. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, Charlie was obviously doing his Scotland circumnavigation, and we stayed in communication sort of throughout the Scottish leg that I was on, and we crossed paths literally just probably 10, 15 kilometres short of Cape Wrath, and myself and Charlie got together. And as you say, a great advocate for mental health and sort of that blue therapy. A lovely guy, a really interesting guy. And I really enjoyed spending, an hour or so with him before we both went on our way. But incredibly, a huge amount of respect for him doing that, on his own as well. Self-supported was really, I take my hat off, because the conditions up there where we met were absolutely brutal, and going around Cape Wrath with a support boat is dangerous enough, never mind going around on your own. So absolute massive respect to Charlie, lovely guy, and wish him the best of success with his expeditions. And an incredible paddler as well, very experienced paddler, he put me to shame, certainly.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, and again, coming back to the curated life, people see the success and the achievements, but they don't necessarily see all the perspiration that goes into actually getting there. I mean, Charlie's incredible. He's paddled stretches of the Amazon. I don't know whether you saw the footage of that on Red Bull TV, but my God, what an absolute epic trip that was. And he's just an incredible character and, like you, very, very inspirational. And I think this whole thing about talking about mental health, 10, 15, 20 years ago, no one talked about it at all. And now people do, which is so, so important, because otherwise it's just locked away. People think they're suffering from it on their own, and that's when bad things happen.
No, absolutely. As you say, Charlie, absolute legend of what he's doing and the awareness he's raising around mental health and especially, that blue therapy. I can't, a huge respect to him. Same, there's lots of inspirational paddlers out there that I came across. Cal Manger on the Blue Mind thing as well. She's doing amazing work, very passionate about the ocean. Fiona Quinn, Sarah Thornley. There's so many. There was so many inspiring people I met who are using paddling for a force of good in the world, spreading positive, important messages and about causes and things that need to be raised. So the SUP community is booming with inspiring people, and I was very lucky to meet some of them.
Absolutely, and largely female. You're absolutely right. I don't know whether you remember me saying this to you on the beach, but I thanked you for holding the end up for male paddlers, because Fiona Quinn, Cal Major, absolute legends. I'm interviewing Fiona in a few weeks' time. Cal Major we've had on. International paddlers, Maddie LeBlanc from Canada, Fiona Wild, Samantha Rutt, Marie Buchanan you've mentioned already, Sarah Thornley. I mean, we are absolutely awash with inspirational female paddlers, and thanks for making the case for male paddlers there, mate. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. But as you say, incredible female paddlers out there. I learned a lot on the South Coast from paddling with, people like Sarah, Marie, Ginny. They taught me so much, in such short periods of time. So very honoured to paddle with legends of the sport like those.
Just a couple of things I wanted to cover off with you. So obviously we've got the culmination and the finish. I mean, that must have been quite a blow to take when you realised that you couldn't progress any further.
Yeah, it was. I won't sort of lie about it. It was a brutal blow. To have paddled for 149 days plus, and 2, 3, 7 kilometres. And then to be in touching distance, we can almost see John O'Groats, and we know we've just got to do the home straight, and we're back into Essex was really tough. But we have to remember our why, and that was one of the big things. For us, we never forgot from the start of why we were doing this, and it was to inspire hope through education to those children on the Horn of Africa, and to inspire young people in the UK through the spirit of adventure, and that was how I will measure success of that expedition. And for me, we achieved that. We raised nearly £100,000. We built a new school for children, and for me, it's always about why we did it, not what we did. We were just very fortunate to have an incredible paddling adventure, but most importantly, we were able to inspire hope for the children. So, as much as it was a tough blow and it was very difficult to accept, and it's disappointing because of from the public and the media side. Ultimately, what we did was achieve something far bigger than a world record or a world first. We were able to give the gift of education to 250 children and many more for years to come, and you can't put a price on that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what an incredible adventure you had. And just to say again, followed it with a combination of my jaw dropping or holding my breath the whole way around. And I know that other people were very similar. I've recently interviewed a chap from Torbay called Brendan Prince, who is going to attempt to circumnavigate Great Britain this year. He's starting in April. I know you've had a chat with him. What sort of advice can you offer him in terms of his circumnavigation?
Yeah, I was contacted by Brendan recently, and we had a good chat together, and I try and share as many insights as I could with him and any lessons that I learned. But I get huge respect to anyone who's going to step up and have a go at that. And he's certainly got a lot more experience and knows perhaps the some areas of the coast more than I did. So I think he'll be a lot better prepared. He's obviously going at a more sensible time of year than I went, and I think it's the same advice that I was given. It's about taking one day at a time and staying in the game. When things get tough, just keep persevering. It doesn't matter how long it takes. If you hang in there every day and you just keep chipping away, you will get there in the end. And I believe that we would have got there, but unfortunately the law and legislation wasn't allowing us. But there'll be many times when you want to give up. There'll be many times when you want to quit. But it's important just to keep staying in the game day by day, keep chipping away, and you'll get there in the end. It's about perseverance. It's about discipline. It's about getting up and going out there and putting that neoprene or wetsuit on when you don't want to, when it's cold at 3:00 in the morning and it's not nice and it's uncomfortable. It's about having the discipline to still do it even when you're not motivated. But, he's doing it for a great cause. And I've said to him, I've offered my complete full support. So has everyone at the Great British Paddle. And he's got my phone number, my email, and I'm on the end. If I can help with any contacts, sponsorship or advice, I'm there for him, and I wish him the best of luck. And I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, hope that he makes it and becomes the first person to do it. I sincerely mean that.
So what's next for you? The school is being built. Are you going to go out and supervise?
Yeah, the school is nearly built. It's been being built for 2 years, and that's why I've had to keep doing different adventures. But as soon as international travel is allowed, I'll be out on the Horn of Africa and hope to be able to, get the video footage. I think Alfie or James is going to come out with me, so we'll capture that leg, that final leg, if you like, of the Great British Paddle with a school built. And then for me, it's at the moment I'm trying to do lots of talks and things for school children in assemblies and Zoom calls and cadets and waiting for, like everyone else, lockdown to be lifted and the world to start turning again. But I was scheduled to be at the North Pole in April, but that's just been cancelled because of the restrictions. But I've still got an expedition to Antarctica in December, so fingers crossed for that one. But yeah, we just got to try and stay positive and keep chipping away, and as I say, look after each other in these challenging times.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, as I knew it would. Thanks so much for all the hard work you're doing and the fundraising. And I know I speak for the SUP community to say that you've been an absolute credit to it. I hope you carry on paddleboarding.
No, definitely, and absolutely. Probably when it's a bit warmer and the waters are a bit calmer, I probably won't be heading to the west coast of Scotland in winter anytime soon for a paddle. But absolute pleasure to be on this episode on the show, Simon. I think you and the team do an amazing job of providing good news stories in the world, which is really important. And it's a great platform. And if I can ever help with anything at all, I'm only at the end of the phone. Don't hesitate to ask.
Fantastic. And of course, the traditional question at the end of a podcast is, where can we find out more about you?
Yeah, you can follow me on social media, or my handle across all platforms is at Mr. Jordan Wylie. Or my website is jordanwylie.org. But, please feel free to engage. And as I say, if I can help anybody who's going on an adventure, a SUP adventure in particular, always reach out and I'll always try and come back to you. But, most importantly, enjoy it, make sure it's safe. And if you can have a positive impact on the world, please do.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jordan. And hopefully see you on the water, maybe the Basingstoke Canal soon.
Absolutely. Take care, mate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for listening all the way through. In a lot of these recordings, I sometimes forget I'm supposed to be interviewing and get caught up in the stories, and this happened several times in this episode. We work really hard to bring you these episodes, and the fact that you've listened to the end is the validation and the motivation we need to keep producing this podcast and to continue celebrating stand-up paddle in all of its forms. But we do want more paddlers to know about us, so we'd really appreciate anything you can do to spread the word. So from a social media like or a review, or just sharing an episode with a Facebook group, it all helps to get more people engaged with this fantastic sport that we share. So thank you again for listening, and see you on the water.
Thank you for listening to SUPfm, the #1 podcast for stand-up paddlers wherever you are. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on iTunes. Until then, we'll see you on the water.